Hello, Fritz.
The Bears are who we thought they were.
The Bears. The Bears.
I am the great Cornholio.
We'll see what happens.
Playoffs?
See, Sean McDonough, Jay Billis. Goats!
You can play a song. Something cool.
Put my mic on.
I'm calling both games.
Oh, baby.
Goes down the field for Smith.
Oh, he got it!
Seattle. We're getting ready for Cincinnati.
Week 1 is prime time overreaction NFL time. And if you've watched any Sports Center or NFL Now or NFL Today or any of that stuff recently, you probably are starting to understand, or maybe you do know what I'm talking about. You know, after week 1, you probably heard something saying, oh, Kirk Cousins is going to be the MVP. And I'm here to tell you that that is an overreaction. You know, we hear, you know, the Steelers are gonna win the division. Okay, let's ease off on that a little bit. Let's calm down. I know we're all excited from that first week of football. I know it was crazy and it was amazing, but let's take a step back, calm down, and start to think about this first week of football a little more rationally, smarter, whatever you want to say. Let's kind of think about this a little bit before we just spew off some crazy information. So, the question for this segment is to overreact or not to overreact. Number 1, the Vikings will win the division, not an overreaction. The Lions and the Bears, they're not going to be contenders. It's plain and simple. They're just not going to win the division. Packers are still in the conversation, but, you know, if the Packers, you know, if 2 teams out of the division are not going to win it, well, there's only teams, and Vikings did pretty well beating the Packers in week 1. That's a good start. If you're going to want to win the division, that's a pretty good start. The Packers going into the season, as I said, they're something to worry about, and not worry about in terms of having to play them, but worry about in terms of being a Packers fan. They lost Adams, they lost Valdez, and they have Lazard and Robert Tonyan as their targets, and that's pretty much it. Aaron Rodgers is going to have to really put this team on his back more so than previous years. Aaron Jones is going to have to step up with a running back. They're going to have to not lean so much on the air attack. They're going to have to do more on the ground. Their defense is going to have to step up, which they didn't in week 1 in Minnesota. That was ugly for them. You know, Vikings, again, it's week 1. They're not going to play like that every week. I understand that. But if week 1 for the Vikings is any sign and if there's any chance that they can replicate that, then yeah, they have a pretty good shot at winning the division. I wouldn't say that's an overreaction, especially in that weak division where, as I mentioned, 2 teams are just not, it's just not going to happen, right? The Lions and Bears are just not going to win that division. And the Packers, again, they're always going to be in the conversation to win the division, but Vikings look pretty good. I would not say that's an overreaction. Number 2, Packers will miss the playoffs. That's an overreaction, and I learned my lesson on this last season. You know, everybody remembers week 1, they played the Saints in Jacksonville, and they looked terrible. They got embarrassed. People, myself included, were saying, oh, Aaron Rodgers has given up on this team. He doesn't want to be there anymore. The Packers are done. It's time to look forward. The next week, Aaron Rodgers came out and looked like the MVP Aaron Rodgers that we all know and love. And then he went on, got the number 1 seed in the playoffs. Yeah, he ultimately choked, and you know, I wouldn't say he choked, but, you know, the team ultimately didn't even make it to the NFC Championship as the number 1 seed in the NFC. Yeah, but they still had a good regular season. And, you know, yeah, you can make the argument that, well, the regular season doesn't really matter unless, you know, it leads to a good postseason and to a Super Bowl. We can save that argument for another day, but at the end of the day, I would not say that the Packers are going to miss the playoffs after 1 game. I made that mistake last year, and I will not make that mistake ever again, as long as Aaron Rodgers is on this team. And as I just mentioned, they might be in trouble in terms of winning the NFC North, but I wouldn't write them off yet. I would not crumple them up and throw them in the trash yet. Especially me. I would definitely not do that, because as I mentioned, I learned that lesson last year. I came on here after week 1, about this time of the year, right? And I said, oh, it's over. They're done. Yeah, you can kiss them goodbye. And, well, I made myself look like a real fool, right? Number 3, the Steelers hype. Overreaction. Overreaction. Steelers fans need to take a chill pill and take a step back. Yeah, they won. That's great. Congratulations. Round of applause. They won. But they also had a commanding lead in the first half, and even into the second half. They had a commanding lead. They had the Bengals on the ropes, and they couldn't deliver the knockout punch. The ones that delivered the knockout punch were the Bengals. They delivered the knockout punch to themselves. Burrow looked bad in the first half. There's no doubt in that, right? But that's the thing. It wasn't like Tom Brady or the best quarterback of all time, it wasn't like a top 10 quarterback went out there or top 5 all-time quarterback went out there, threw for 300 yards in the first half, and the Steelers were still winning. That's it. Burrow had 3 first-half interceptions, threw a couple of them right to them, talking about interceptions over the whole game. I mean, I don't know if the Steelers were wearing the Harry Potter invisible cloak or what was going on, but Burrow threw some of those balls right to the Steelers as if he was playing for the Steelers. And that's on Burrow. That's not, as the Steelers' job, if he throws right to you, yeah, you're supposed to pick it off. What else are you going to do? So, yeah, it's great for them if they intercept the ball, but it's not like they went out. And the Minkah Fitzpatrick interception was good. I'll give them that. I'll give the Steelers fans that one. But the Bengals looked distraught in the first half. And as I mentioned, they had Cincinnati on the ropes. All they needed to do was really score one more touchdown in regulation, and that thing was over. And yet they couldn't do it. They couldn't stop the Bengals' offense in really the fourth quarter, and they came storming back. And if Evan McPherson could make a darn kick, the Bengals would have been 1-0. And we don't hear any of this excitement from the Steelers. So the Steelers are, yeah, their defense is looking okay. And every time they win a game, we're going to hear that. We're not going away. And to some point, they're right. And I believe I mentioned this last year, and even the year before when, actually I think it was 2 years ago when Roethlisberger was hurt and Rudolph was the quarterback. They were still hanging around 500 and they were still being competitive. And I said, the Steelers are like a roach. You just can't kill it. And Steelers, that's just the way they're going to be. They could have a bad team. They're one of those teams that they could have anybody on their team, and they'd still be competitive. So, again, the Steelers had the Bengals on the ropes. They couldn't deliver the knockout blow. And I think you play a team like the Bills, right, or the Bucks, potentially, maybe, depending on how they kind of develop. They didn't impress me too much in the first game, but, take a look at a team like the Bills. And for the Steelers, if you don't deliver that knockout punch to a team like the Bills are going to win that game in regulation, right? They're going to make that kick. They're going to take advantage of it. They're going to win the game in the first drive in overtime and the second drive in overtime and the third. I think the Bengals had only 2 drives in overtime. But point being is the only team that delivered the knockout punch in that game was the Bengals, and they knocked themselves out. Missing an extra point in regulation, and then missing 2 field goals in overtime, right? So Steelers looked better than I think I expected them to be, but the Bengals also looked worse than I expected them to be. So I want to see more from the Steelers before I start worrying about them as a potential team to make the playoffs. Patriots are going to have a losing record. Number 4, not an overreaction. They looked terrible. They don't have a strong roster, and the Mac Jones hype from last year was an overreaction, and I'm feeling a significant drop-off this year. Also, the AFC is just one of those conferences this year where it's too competitive for a subpar team to make the playoffs. And what I mean by that is last season, the Raiders made the playoffs. And I'm not saying the Raiders were subpar last year, but that last year's Raiders team would not make the playoffs this year, just by the dynamic of the AFC, because you've got the Bengals and Ravens as playoff contenders, maybe the Browns, depending on what goes on there. You've got the Bills and now the Dolphins because they put together a pretty good roster. Somebody's going to win the the AFC South, and then you've also got the Chiefs, Chargers, and Raiders / maybe the entire AFC West to worry about. You know what I mean? So a subpar team is just not going to make the playoffs this year. A 9-8, 10-7 team is just not making the playoffs this year. Unless it's a team with some crazy tiebreaker scenario, right? I think worst case scenario, you probably have to be 11-6 to make the playoffs this year in the AFC. I'm not buying it from the Patriots. And again, it's week 1. Who knows? But I'm feeling that this is not just a first week issue for the Patriots. And yeah, Bill Belichick has always had that issue with beating the Dolphins in his career, but this is a little bit different. He didn't look too good. The Patriots at least didn't look too good in week 1, but Belichick always has that knack to, as I mentioned before, he can go to the local McDonald's, round up the troops there, and he could still have a pretty decent season. So I think that the Patriots are in worse shape now than I think I've ever seen them in my life. Because Brady has been there for so long, and even under the years of Cam and Mac, past 2-3 years, they were still competitive and they still had a fighting chance at the playoffs. Even made the playoffs last year. Number 5, Browns can stay afloat without Watson. We'll see. They were in a similar spot like the Steelers and Saints, with the Steelers and Falcons, where they were up big. And I guess you put the Texans in that category as well. But they were up big, and it looked like, okay, that game's over. I guess Baker Mayfield's not getting his revenge. And then all of a sudden, they couldn't deliver the knockout punch. Panthers kind of creeped back into that thing. And all of a sudden, the Panthers were on the verge of making a comeback and winning that game. So I will say this. Neither team in that game looked awful. The Panthers didn't look particularly great in the first half, but it wasn't necessarily that they played terrible. They just couldn't come up with a first down conversion, and come up with one play on a drive when it mattered. I mean, they were still, driving the ball, getting some yardage. I mean, you look at the stats. The stats for the Panthers aren't that bad. It wasn't like Baker went out there and threw 4 picks. And it wasn't like McCaffrey fumbled the ball 4 times. And McCaffrey didn't get more than 40 yards or anything like that. They had a good game stat-wise. It just didn't lead to anything on the scoreboard. And, I will say this. Jacoby Brissett, a lot of people will knock him, and a lot of people will make fun of him, and they'll say, oh, my goodness, the Browns are going with Jacoby Brissett. They're done. They're not going to do anything, right? I mean, you look at his time with, I guess you could date all the way back to when he was on the Patriots, right? And again, I don't know how much of this is, how much of this you give credit to Belichick and how much of this you give credit to the actual player. But when Brady had his 4-game suspension for deflating the ball, Garoppolo went out and played, I think, the first 2 or 3 games, and then I think he got hurt, and then Brissett played a game, and they were 4-0 in that stretch. Brissett went to the Colts, and it was a point where there were some parts in the middle of the season where there was a conversation: should it be Brissett or should it be Rivers? I know multiple times on to end the second half, when it was a Hail Mary type of situation, they went ahead and put Brissett in because they felt he had the stronger arm. And last year on the Dolphins, when Tua was hurt and he came in, I was more worried about Brissett's ability to, as a Ravens fan, I was more worried about Brissett than I was Tua. So Brissett is a guy that, again, a lot of people will make fun of him and a lot of people will knock him, but I don't think he's really all that bad as a second quarterback. He's not going to be a guy that's going to go start a 17-game season, right? But as a backup guy, he can still keep you afloat until your starter comes back.